In a fit of rage, a daughter throws a glass of water in her mother's face and screams, "You're not my mother." What she doesn't realize is that her mother is the silent majority partner in her successful new business. The phone call she now begs her mother not to make is to the lawyer who holds the power to dissolve her entire company and shatter her dreams. Hello and welcome back to the channel. This story is about a line that should never be crossed. Before we begin, please show your support by hitting the like button, subscribing, and clicking the notification bell. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. The scent of fresh paint and expensive coffee filled the air. I was sitting at a small marble table in my daughter Emily's new pride and joy, the Gilded Bean, an artisan coffee shop she had opened 3 months ago. To her, it was a testament to her own brilliant business acumen. To me, it was the result of the $500,000 inheritance from her father that I had agreed to let her use as seed money. I was, on paper, the silent 70% partner in this venture, a fact Emily preferred to forget. Today, I was just here for our weekly lunch, trying my best to play the role of a quietly supportive, non-interfering mother. The tension between us, however, was as thick as the foam on her overpriced lattes. She was excitedly showing me the proofs for a new magazine ad she had designed. The ad was beautiful, glossy, and eye-wateringly expensive. "Isn't it perfect, Mom?" she asked, her eyes shining with ambition. I looked at the invoice from the marketing firm. The number made my stomach clench. "It's very stylish, honey," I said carefully. "But are you sure spending this much on a single print ad is the wisest use of capital right now? The quarterly profit margins are still quite thin." It was the wrong thing to say. Her face, which had been bright with excitement, instantly hardened. "The capital?" she repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. "You mean the money you keep holding over my head? Mom, this is my business. I know what I'm doing. You're a retired librarian, not a marketing genius." The insult was designed to sting, and it did. "I'm also the person who financed this entire operation," I reminded her, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm just trying to offer a little perspective." That was when she snapped. The mask of the successful, confident businesswoman fell away, replaced by the face of a petulant, enraged child. "Perspective? You mean control. That's all you've ever wanted. You just can't stand that I've built this myself, that I'm a success without you," she seethed. Her words were absurd. She couldn't have built any of this without me, but she was too lost in her own narrative to see the truth. She picked up her glass of ice water from the table, her hand trembling with rage. "You know what? You're not my mother anymore. Stop trying to run my life." And with that, she threw the entire glass of ice-cold water directly in my face. The shock was total. The icy water dripped from my hair and down my blouse, the cubes clattering onto the floor. The few other patrons in the cafe turned to stare. My daughter stood over me, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing with a hateful fire. In that moment, she wasn't my child. She was a stranger, an adversary who had just committed an act of profound public disrespect. The pain of it was a physical blow, sharp and stunning, but underneath the pain, something else began to rise, a cold, hard, and utterly final resolve. The loving, supportive mother she had just disowned was gone, and in her place was a 70% majority partner who had just been assaulted by a junior associate. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I slowly and deliberately took a napkin from the table and began to wipe the water from my face. I looked at her, my expression now completely unreadable. "Fine," I said, and my voice was so cold and quiet it seemed to cut through the air. "If I'm not your mother, then I suppose that makes me just your business partner." I stood up from the table, my movements calm and measured, and as the majority partner in this enterprise, I have some serious thinking to do about its future, and yours. I turned and walked towards the door, leaving her standing there by the table. I saw her face in the reflection of the large glass window as I left. The triumphant anger was gone, replaced by the first flickering dawn of pure, abject terror. I've only just begun this story, but believe me, it's about to get even more intense. Stay tuned to find out what happens when the hero faces an even greater injustice. I walked out of the Gilded Bean without looking back, the bell above the door chiming my exit. The cool afternoon air was a welcome relief against my still damp face. The shock of the cold water had faded, leaving behind a strange and terrible clarity. The line hadn't just been crossed, it had been obliterated. My daughter, in her arrogant rage, had fundamentally redefined our relationship. I was no longer her mother. I was, as I had told her, her business partner. And I decided, right there on the sidewalk, that I would start acting like one. A business partner whose majority investment had just been assaulted and insulted by a volatile junior associate. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time, not out of indecision, but to let the raw emotion, the hurt, the maternal grief, wash through me and recede. I needed to be cold for what came next. As expected, my phone began to buzz, then again and again, a frantic series of calls from Emily. I looked at her name on the screen, the name I had chosen for her, and felt a distant pang of sorrow for the girl she used to be. Then I calmly silenced the phone and put it in my purse. Her panic was her problem now, not mine. The time for emotional appeals was over. This was a legal matter. Instead of driving home, I drove directly to the downtown offices of Abernathy & Sons, the law firm that had handled my family's affairs for decades. I didn't have an appointment, but Howard Abernathy, a man who had known me since I was a young bride, agreed to see me immediately. I sat in the same leather chair where I had sat just a few months prior to deal with another family crisis, and I recounted the events of the last hour with a calm, chilling detachment. I told him about the argument, the insult, the glass of water, and Emily's declaration that I was no longer her mother. I then slid the partnership agreement for the coffee shop across his desk. Howard listened patiently, his face growing more grim with every word. When I was finished, he read the partnership agreement, his finger tracing the clause that outlined my 70% ownership stake and my unilateral power over all major financial and operational decisions. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a sad understanding. "Catherine," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You hold all the cards here. Legally, her actions constitute a breach of professional conduct, not to mention the personal assault. You have several avenues you can pursue." He laid out the options as if discussing moves on a chessboard. Option 1. We could send a formal warning, a legal slap on the wrist. Option 2. We could begin proceedings to have her legally removed from her position as managing partner, citing gross misconduct. She would retain her 30% minority share, but would have no operational control. She would, in effect, be an employee in the business she thought she owned. Option 3, the nuclear option. We could invoke the dissolution clause in the partnership agreement, citing irreparable differences and a hostile business environment. We could force a liquidation of the entire company. Sell the equipment, terminate the lease, pay off the debts, and walk away, leaving her with 30% of whatever was left, which wouldn't be much. I thought of Emily's face, contorted with rage as she screamed at me. I thought of her ambition, her pride, her absolute certainty that she had built this business herself. She had disowned me as a mother. She had rejected my guidance as a partner. She wanted to be a success all on her own. A cold, hard resolve settled in my heart. She said I wasn't her mother. I said quietly, looking at Howard. So I will act purely as a business owner, protecting her investment from a volatile and unprofessional partner. I leaned forward. Draft the dissolution papers, Howard. We're liquidating. I went home from Mr. Abernathy's office with a strange sense of calm. The decision had been made. The die was cast. I spent the evening in my garden, pruning my roses, the simple, methodical work a balm to my bruised soul. I did not check my phone. I did not wait for an apology. I had handed the situation over to the cold, clean, and entirely unemotional mechanisms of the law. My daughter had wanted me to stop acting like a mother, and I was merely granting her wish. A mother might have been swayed by tears and tantrums. A 70% majority partner, however, is moved only by liability and risk. And my junior partner had just become a very significant risk to my investment. The next afternoon, I received a call from Mr. Abernathy. "The papers have been served, Catherine," he said, his voice all business. "The process server delivered them to your daughter personally at the coffee shop an hour ago." He paused. He reported that the scene was quite dramatic. I could only imagine. The Gilded Bean was Emily's kingdom, the stage for her performance as a brilliant young entrepreneur. To be served with legal papers in front of her own employees and customers, to have her authority so publicly and legally challenged would have been a catastrophic blow to her ego. The frantic phone calls started minutes after I hung up with my lawyer. This time, I answered. I wanted to hear it. "What have you done?" she shrieked, her voice a mixture of terror and rage. "Dissolution? Are you insane? You're destroying my life, my business." I held the phone slightly away from my ear. "No, Emily," I said calmly, "I am not destroying your business. I am liquidating my business, the one you have been managing. There's a difference." But I built this," she stammered. "Then you should have no trouble building another one from scratch," I replied coolly. "I need to go now. I'm sure you have your own lawyer to call." I hung up before she could respond. The silence that followed was more telling than her screaming. She knew she had no legal leg to stand on. The partnership agreement was ironclad. She knew she had no emotional leverage left to use. She had burned that bridge with a glass of ice water. The hours ticked by. I made myself dinner. I read a book. I refused to let her manufactured crisis dictate my evening. But just as I was about to go to bed, I heard a car pull into my driveway, followed by frantic, desperate footsteps running to my front door. The pounding was loud and insistent. I opened the door to find my daughter standing on my porch, illuminated by the yellow glow of the porch light. She was a complete wreck. Her face was pale and tear-streaked. Her fashionable clothes looked rumpled, and she was clutching the legal documents from Mr. Abernathy's office in a white-knuckled grip. The arrogant, defiant woman from the coffee shop was gone. In her place was a terrified girl who had just seen her entire world about to be swept away. "Mom," she whispered, the word a desperate plea. "Mom, please, don't do this." I didn't say anything. I just looked at her, my face impassive. Okay, I'm sorry," she cried, the words tumbling out of her in a rush. "I was horrible. What I did was unforgivable. I was stressed, and I was stupid, and I said a terrible thing. I didn't mean it. You are my mother. Of course you are my mother." She took a step closer, her eyes wide with panic. "Please, just call him off. Call the lawyer. Tell him to stop. I'll do anything. Please don't take my shop away. It's all I have." And then To my utter astonishment, she sank to her knees on the hard stone of my porch, her head bowed in supplication. She was weeping, begging me not to call my lawyer, a call I had already made a day ago. The irony was devastating. I looked down at my daughter, this broken, pleading figure at my feet, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty expanse of quiet. The time for apologies was over. The time for tears was over. This was now a simple equation of action and consequence. She had made her choice in the coffee shop. I had made mine in a lawyer's office. "You should have thought of that," I said, my voice as cold and clear as the water she had thrown in my face, "before you told me I wasn't your mother." I stepped back and quietly closed the door, leaving her kneeling alone in the dark. Closing the door on my kneeling, weeping daughter was the hardest and simplest thing I had ever done. There was no triumph in it, only the grim finality of a chapter ending. The days that followed were quiet. Mr. Abernathy's office proceeded with the dissolution of the company as instructed. Legal notices were sent, accounts were frozen, and the process of liquidating the assets of the Gilded Bean began. I heard through my cousin that Emily had moved out of her expensive apartment and was staying on a friend's couch. Her new fiancé, it seemed, had quietly vanished once the prospect of a multi-million-dollar inheritance had evaporated. My daughter was alone, her pride and her business in ashes, all because of a single ugly outburst. I expected more frantic calls, more desperate texts, but there was only silence. For 5 days, I heard nothing. I began to wonder if her pride was so absolute that she would rather lose everything than show true remorse. Then, on the 6th day, a thick, hand-addressed envelope appeared in my mailbox. It was from Emily. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. It wasn't a card. It was a letter, several pages long, written in her familiar, looping script. It was not the letter of a spoiled child. It was the letter of a broken woman. She didn't make excuses. She didn't blame me. She took full, devastating responsibility for her actions. She wrote about her own insecurity, her jealousy of her friends' successes, and the immense pressure she had put on herself to appear brilliant and independent. She confessed that my financial backing, instead of feeling like a gift, had felt like a constant reminder of her own perceived inadequacy. "Every time you offered advice," she wrote, "I didn't hear a mother trying to help. I heard a majority partner questioning my judgment. I was so desperate to prove that the success was mine that I saw you as an adversary. I was a fool." She wrote that throwing the water was the act of a cornered, terrified child, and that the moment the words, "You're not my mother," left her mouth, she had been horrified at herself. The letter ended not with a request for money or for the business, but with a simple, heartbreaking plea. "I have lost everything that matters, but I hope someday I have not lost you." I read the letter 3 times, the tears I had refused to shed that day in the coffee shop now streaming down my face. This was my daughter, the real her. The girl I had raised was still in there, buried under layers of pride and fear. The cold, hard wall around my heart began to crack. The dissolution of the business was almost complete. The equipment would be sold at auction next week. The lease on the beautiful space would be terminated. But was that what I truly wanted? Was my goal to punish her? Or was it to teach her a lesson? The lesson, I realized, had been learned. I called Mr. Abernathy. I told him about the letter. He, a man of contracts and consequences, advised caution. "The legal process is a clean one, Catherine," he reminded me. "Re-entering a partnership with her is a risk." I knew he was right. The old way was over. We could never go back to that flawed dynamic. But maybe, just maybe, we could build something new. I thanked him for his counsel and hung up the phone. I knew what I had to do. It was a risk, yes, but she was my daughter. I knew. I dialed her number. She answered on the first ring, her voice small and timid. Hello, Emily, I said, my own voice softer than it had been in weeks. I received your letter. I heard her take a shaky breath on the other end. I am not stopping the dissolution, I said firmly. The Gilded Bean is over. I let that sink in, a final, necessary consequence. But, I continued, what you built was, despite your terrible management, a beautiful space with a good concept. The bones are good. I paused. The equipment auction is on Tuesday. I will be there. I suggest you be there too. And after it's over, we can talk about the possibility of a new, much smaller, and very different kind of partnership, one with new rules. I didn't wait for a reply. I just said, "Goodbye, Emily," and hung up, leaving her with a sliver of hope and a final test of her newfound humility. We are on the verge of the climax. What happens now will turn everything upside down. You simply cannot miss the resolution of this story. The auction was a grim, soulless affair. The beautiful, expensive Italian espresso machine, the marble-topped tables, the velvet chairs, all the things Emily had chosen with such pride, were lined up in a sterile warehouse under harsh fluorescent lights, each with a numbered lot tag. It felt like a funeral for a dream. I saw Emily arrive. She stood at the back of the small crowd, looking pale and lost, a ghost at her own wake. She watched me, her expression unreadable, as I registered to bid. She thought I was just there to oversee the end of things. She had no idea I was there for a new beginning. One by one, the lots for the Gilded Bean came up. I bid on every single one: the espresso machine, the commercial-grade grinders, the pastry display case, the tables and chairs. Other bidders, mostly restaurant liquidators, would try to compete, but I never faltered. I had the final sale price of the business assets calculated to the penny, and I was prepared to spend it all. I was, in effect, buying my own equipment back from myself. Emily watched the entire process in stunned, silent confusion. By the end of the hour, I had won every lot. I was once again the sole owner of all the physical components of the failed business. After the auction, I found her outside, lingering by her car. "Get in," I said simply. "We're going somewhere." We drove in silence to the now empty shell of the Gilded Bean. Mr. Abernathy had arranged for me to have the keys for one final walkthrough. Inside, the space echoed with our footsteps. The ghost of our last terrible argument hung in the air. We stood in the center of the empty room, and I finally turned to face her. "The company we started is gone, Emily," I said. "It was legally dissolved this morning. It was built on a flawed foundation, on my money and your pride. That will not happen again." She looked down at the floor, expecting, I suppose, a final lecture, but that wasn't why I brought her here. "I bought all the equipment," I continued. "It's in storage, under my name. I am prepared to use it as the initial capital investment for a new company." I saw her head slowly lift, her eyes wide with a fragile, dawning hope. A new coffee shop, right here, in this space. I held up my hand before she could get too excited, but with new rules, very different rules. I laid out my offer. We will be 50-50 partners, not a 70-30 split where I am a silent investor. We will be equal partners with equal say in every decision. I will provide the equipment and the initial operating capital not as a gift, but as a formal, interest-bearing loan to our new company with a strict repayment schedule. I looked her directly in the eye, my voice firm. "You will be the managing partner, but you will provide me with a full financial report on the first of every month. You will pay yourself a modest, fixed salary, the same as any manager, until that business loan is paid back in full. We will build this together, as equals, with transparency and mutual respect. Or we won't build it at all. The choice is yours. I had expected her to balk at the terms, at the strict oversight, at the lack of a free ride. I had expected to see a flicker of the old entitled resentment. But the woman standing in front of me was not the same one who had thrown water in my face. The last few weeks had humbled her. She looked around the empty room, at the ghost of her failed dream, and then back at me. I saw tears well up in her eyes, but this time they were not tears of rage or panic. They were tears of genuine, overwhelming gratitude. "Yes, Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Okay, yes, that is more than fair." She took a step forward, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she hugged me. A real hug, not a perfunctory peck on the cheek, but a desperate, grateful embrace. I held my daughter, and I knew our journey was far from over. But as we stood there in the empty shell of our old mistakes, planning the layout of our new shared future, I knew we were finally on the right path.